Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to The Upside. My name is Jonathan Oleski with JMOR, and I'm very excited to introduce our two co-hosts today, Beth Goldsmith, Chair of the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore, and Dr. Scott Rifkin, publisher of JMOR. Beth and Scott, take it away.
Thanks, Jonathan, and welcome again to The Upside, our virtual show brought to you by the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore and JMOR Magazine to keep our Baltimore Jewish community informed during this time of uncertainty. This Friday evening, we will celebrate Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. Looking back, I don't think any of us could have imagined what 5780 would bring. A pandemic that has changed the way we live, the rise in global anti-Semitism, the protests and fight for racial justice. Today, we're fortunate to have Marc Terrill, president of the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore, on our show to talk about some of these issues and how they've impacted our community. He will share the Associated's plans for the new year, talk about the tremendous resiliency and support for one another that we've seen from Jewish Baltimore, and let us know the trends we need to be on the lookout for. Scott, please introduce our guest.
Well, I have the easiest job in America today. I mean, I get to introduce somebody that everybody in the community knows, everybody in the community likes, and is doing a phenomenal job in what he does. So this is really easy. I've had to introduce people over the years that nobody liked or weren't doing a good job. So this is really phenomenal. So Marc, thank you for being here today. 17 years at Associated, leading a ship that always seems to be heading in the right direction. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you, Beth.
So Marc, let me lead off with a question. When we left you last, we spoke, it's been a couple months now, about what was going on at Associated and the such, but we also asked you about you and what was going on with you and your family. Talk about you and your family and how you're handling the pandemic. Then we'll get into all the Associated stuff. But I want to make sure people understand this is a personal thing for everybody. So talk a little bit about where you and your family are.
Okay, well, thanks for the question. In terms of how we're faring and how we're doing, it's we're kind of like everybody else, or we are like everybody else, that we're just doing what needs to happen. Now, as a family, we had an unfortunate illness that took us to Pittsburgh, where my mother-in-law was ill. Our daughter moved to Phoenix to pursue her doctorate in clinical psychology. That was a little bit of a to-do of moving a child across the country during the pandemic. And I've got twins who are in their senior year who are doing all their schoolwork virtually. So it's been somewhat of a challenge. But like I said, for everyone, but we're blessed, we're doing well. And, but it has been kind of like this unbelievable roller coaster certainly for the Terrill family. And I know for others who are viewing today. Very
good. Well, it helps that the community gets to hear, look, nobody wishes illness on anybody, and I hope everything worked out in that regard. But the fact that you're affected by the same things all of us are affected by, I think is an important story to tell. So thank you for telling that. Appreciate it. Beth, what do you got?
Thanks, Scott. Hi, Marc. It's so, as if we don't see each other. So please tell the rest of the community how we at the Associated are addressing some of the issues like financial assistance, domestic violence, food insecurity, all the things brought on by the pandemic.
Okay, well, first of all, what I think everybody needs to know is that the Jewish community has been rocked by this pandemic. And it's again, we're not atypical. We're like everybody else in the world that has had to deal with this. The types of things that have affected our community are big and some small, and it's forced us to be resilient, adaptive, innovative, and have resolve. So certain things like You mentioned food. You mentioned about emergency cash assistance. There are people who are unemployed and underemployed. There are people who have reported out before coronavirus that they don't have enough money in order to make ends meet. About 9% of our community. That number has swelled to over 15% now given the pandemic. So the associated system has, through our network of agencies that you're familiar with, Jewish Community Services, the Pearlstone Center, the JCC, the Jewish Museum of Maryland, you know the alphabet soup, have now worked together of making sure that we're dealing first and foremost with the basic needs. So our service delivery system is focused in on food provision, emergency cash assistance, foreclosure prevention, helping people to get jobs, and that's at a very basic level. The second thing is we're helping them to cope and to give triage. The unfortunate result of what's happening now is that we have a number of people who are victims of domestic violence. We're talking about elderly, we're talking about women, we're talking about men, we're talking about children. We have had to ramp up the number of safe houses that we have throughout our community in order to keep these people safe. So that is a real unfortunate reality. Similarly, the mental health, with people being isolated, people not necessarily having the convenience of proximity and supports, we have had a 120% increase through Jewish Community Services in mental health counseling sessions. That's striking. Yeah, so all these things are being provided through our associated network. And one of the important things to know is that it's all done holistically, collaboratively, and under the umbrella of the associated network. The other thing that I would mention is that virtually all of these things are being done virtually, that we don't, as I said, have the luxury of proximity. So we're providing these services in ways that we're not accustomed to. And for 6 months, we've been adjusting, hopefully polishing the apple and perfecting it, but most importantly, providing for those basic needs for community members. Some people are under this falsehood that the Jewish community is doing fine financially. That is not the case. When there are some that are doing very well, but there are others who really, it's a matter of sustenance and quality of life, and I would also say life or death in some instances. So it's been very trying.
Marc, the unemployment levels, and they affect the Jewish community like every community, have been at almost depression levels, certainly in the beginning of this. Are we seeing hunger out in the community? Are we seeing people that aren't getting food?
Well, you know, we are, I'm glad to say that I don't believe that there's anybody hungry in our community. And if they are, they need to call, because we have the resources available in order to make sure that nobody goes hungry. And again, what a testament to this community, because there are some communities that don't have the coordinated services like we do in Baltimore. So hunger and food insecurity has been an issue early on. And we had we developed a mobile food pantry through Chai. The Pearlstone Center has made and delivered food for individuals who needed food. So in answer to your question, I certainly hope that people aren't hungry, because we have those resources in order to make sure that they're not.
Marc, thank you. And let me jump in and ask you, since you're talking about our system, tell us about the advantages of how the Associated is structured, particularly in times like these.
Okay, thank you for asking that. And there, I think it's another feature that is important to know about the Associated. And it was really an allure for me professionally of when I had the opportunity to come to Baltimore it was one of the selling points for me in attractions was the way that we're oriented and situated. It's not a bunch of agencies who are trying to collaborate. It's a group of agencies that do collaborate. On March 17th, right when we knew that this pandemic was not like the common flu and that this had severe consequences and implications for our community, we pulled together the professional and volunteer leadership of all our different agencies, and we talked about what we needed to do right now, how we need to coordinate, how we had gateways of entry for people who needed assistance, how we collected data, how we pivoted, how we would continue to communicate and refine approach. That happens because we're oriented as a system. And our agencies, quite frankly, didn't have to worry about their individual planning. We planned together. Similarly, resource development. The JCC wasn't out there raising money for the JCC and Jewish Community Services for their thing and whatever. And the end result is that a lot of people are getting a number of different phone calls, maybe confusing messages. Here we have a network that's supported by our annual campaign that is dealing with issues in a holistic way. That, I have to say, Beth, is probably the most important benefit of how we're oriented and our modus operandi, of how we deal with community organization in dealing with different issues that come upon us.
So talk about the impact that has, though, on how you've responded to the pandemic. From a fundraising perspective, from an organizing perspective, the organizational structure is wonderful, but talk about how it's interacted with the emergency we're in the middle of.
Well, it's all based on relationships. Again, the agency directors, who I can't say enough about, our management team, our personnel, the people that are making different programs and projects viable and relevant. They're all working together. Now, that's an easy thing to say, but in reality, the way that that's crafted is through planfully addressing those different issues. So back again, Scott, to the agency executives and the leadership. We got together, essentially having a war room for a good 5.5 months, where we were coming up with the plans that responded to the needs and also forecasted. The volunteer leadership was amazing in this. Again, we had volunteer leadership that was involved in the finances and doing financial modeling and scenarios. There are a number of organizations out there now that are former shells of themselves. They might have gone out of business. Not that our picture doesn't have challenges, but we've attacked things as a system that's looking to work together. Now, we have our challenges, but our future continues to be relevant. We're still going to be operational, and we're going to see our way beyond this pandemic. So I think approaching things as a system and being planful and having those relationships is key. Further, even outside of our system, having relationships with the city, with the government, state, federal. When we were having trouble with the PPP, with the Payroll Protection Plan and program, we picked up the phone and we called Senator Cardin. We called others that helped in our advocacy. We called banks that we didn't even have banking relationships with, but had personal relationships, and those bared fruit for the entire system. So I think it all comes down to authentic relationships and trust and working together as one unit.
Marc, I have to jump in while you're talking about trust and authentic relationships and ask you to speak a little more about, you talked about our wonderful agency execs. Speak about staff, speak about morale, and particularly share with everyone your pledge.
Well, again, this was incredibly stressful. And it was stressful for everybody. I'll tell you how it kind of bared out on me. But first, the the whole entire team and personnel. They were now juggling unfamiliar territory in terms of work responsibility, adapting to new ways of doing their jobs, having to rely on Zoom and telephones. God forbid that we didn't have Zoom in these types of things during this time. So, and at the same time, listen, if you've got older parents, you're worried about taking care of them. If you have children, you're worried about taking care of them. You're anxious about a multitude of things. So we collectively have tried, and I think based on some pulse surveys that we had with personnel along the way, the feedback is that they're feeling supported. However, they're stressed. The workload has been intense. They're fearful about the future and when the pandemic ends, and juggling multiple priorities. So my pledge to them, which I put in writing, there was actually a member of our team who said, IBM had this pledge to their personnel during the pandemic. And I said, really, do we need such a pledge? People know how we operate. We're very supportive of our personnel. And I was convinced that we should put something in writing, that it needs to be reiterated. And essentially it said that we're going to support you. We're not going to laugh or give negative feedback if somebody has a child who's screaming in the background, or a dog or a cat walking across the screen during a Zoom meeting. We're going to be there to be supportive of people. Now, that pledge is good as we are authentically in implementing it. So we've been there for people if they need to take a breather, if they need to take a few days, if they need support or whatever it might be. So we're trying to be there for people and maintain a certain sense of morale. But it's very difficult in terms of proximity. And in a lot of cases, people wanted to hear, that the pandemic was going to be over soon and we were going to be back in the office. We've been open for business, but our physical buildings have been basically closed, but we have no answer of when this is going to end. So as far as I've been asked, and Beth, you have asked, how are you doing? And Scott asked that as well. I've been on overdrive for over 6 months. It's days blend into days, and it's always been intense, but even more so now because of the lack of proximity and having to rely on Zoom and these different types of things. But I think for all intent and purposes, our personnel is doing fine. I have been just overwhelmed by their level of passion and dedication and empathy and commitment to our system and the ways that they have innovated. It's been very heartwarming. And during a time when there's so much negativity, I've seen this can-do fabulous attitude across our system.
How has the giving community responded? I mean, Baltimore has always been sort of an example of a community, a lot because of Associated, that per capita are great donors. How has the community responded to this emergency as you reach out to them?
So Scott, as you know, we don't spend what we don't have. So for example, we were raising money during our last fiscal year to fund this fiscal year. Now, if there was a silver lining of the pandemic, is that most of the resources were already raised before the beginning of the fiscal year. Now, we knew that we were not going to have enough based on how Corona was affecting the system and the services that were being called upon. And our community responded. They knew those who could, should, and did, and those who unfortunately have been donors that became recipients of service, they were giving in different ways, in different the acts of loving kindness, voluntarism, or whatever. And even if they couldn't, it was fine. We wanted to be there to be supportive. So in answer to your question, the community has once again responded. But the fear for the future is we don't know what we don't know. We did know that last year that our total resources were off by 10%. That's after we had hiring freezes, reduction in management pay, significant reductions, furloughs, unfortunately, which was the most painful thing, furloughs and layoffs that we had to take on because some of our agencies were shuttered. They were retail in nature and people couldn't come. So that was a very difficult thing for us to do. So, but the things that we can control, like philanthropic giving, people have been responsive, but I would be less than honest if I didn't say we're going to need more, and more is because of the food insecurity, the cash assistance, the virtual supports, et cetera, et cetera. So my hope is that, and I'll tell you another thing in terms of one of the challenges. How do we reach people? We meet with them or we call them. So people are not necessarily picking up phones, which could be an impediment. So I'm saying to our listeners, if you care, go to the website, make your gift, whether it's the Associated Network, which is a portfolio of over 25 organizations before birth in Mommy and Me programs and hospice care and chaplaincy. All those things are included in our network. If the support is your synagogue or schools or whatever it might be, just be generous because there's some that can't. So right now, all indicators are that Baltimore, once again, is going to meet the challenge.
That's really, really good to hear. As we always say, this is the upside. So thank you for turning it on an upside. And we've talked a lot about the vulnerable and the basic needs. Would you also address the new face of Jewish education and engagement during these times?
Well, let me say that our partners in the synagogues and the day schools have been incredible in terms of preparation and safety and altering curriculum and ways of teaching, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of the new face of Jewish education, I think it's largely, in many respects, it's virtual. There are some schools who have gone back, and they've gone back either entirely or hybrid. We're doing through our system tutoring virtually. We're doing different programs for the little ones in terms of Jewish education, like PJ Library, where there are a number of different virtual programs that support young families in keeping them stimulated, hopefully educated about age-appropriate topics. And in addition, we've got programs across the spectrum. And for adults, we've got through the Meyerberg Senior Center or the Meyerberg Center, a variety of virtual programs focused in on Jewish ed. So it's really a lifelong pursuit. That's one of the values and one of the positions that we've taken. It's not episodic, Jewish learning and education. It's beautiful and should be embraced, we hope, throughout a lifetime. But right now, the new face is really a bunch of little squares where people are engaging in order to keep people engaged, safe, and healthy.
You mentioned the senior centers. I didn't used to listen to much about what was going on in the senior centers, but I'm getting closer and closer. So I suspect that they're going to become important in my life in the near future. So I'm glad you support them. Talk a little bit in the impact of the pandemic on the hate groups that are out there. You know, we live in a very divisive political world. There seems to be a growth of hate groups and anti-Semitism. And the pandemic hasn't helped that at all. And in fact, it seems to have emboldened some of those groups. So comment a little bit on the Associated's involvement in those issues.
Okay, so it's something that it's been very concerning. It was very concerning before the pandemic. It's concerning during the pandemic. It will be concerning after the pandemic. I think that during the pandemic, what it's done, Scott, it's given people a lot more time on virtual platforms to deliver hate and do so anonymously and maybe free time to do things in person and physically. ADL reported out that the rates of anti-Semitic incidents are the highest in over 40 years. Think about that. Think about the highest in over 40 years. So how that has played out is awful, and how it's affected institutions, how it's affected individuals, how it's affected families. I will tell you, and again, this is pre-pandemic, I think I shared with you once, Scott, that my wife's cousins, two of them, were killed in the synagogue in Pittsburgh. So we're not talking about other places and other things and terror in foreign countries. We're living it here, and that hate rhetoric has become more pronounced and more ever present. So in terms of what we're doing at the Associated, and we were doing this before, first and foremost, we're concerned about physical security and about taking care of issues and monitoring and providing for the physical security. Never would I have thought that in the Associated system that we would have a commander in charge of security who's an ex-police commander in the Baltimore City Police, and that we would have a budget to the extent we do in monitoring and in protecting our facilities. So that's one area. Another area which is really important is advocacy at all levels. So it's one thing for us to be vigilant about it, but it's another thing for government entities, city, county, state, federal, and we've had big advancements there. Another aspect is in terms of relationship development and allyship. So sometimes it's one thing to have an anti-Semitic act, but what do you do with it? How do you know when it's there, and how do you respond? In some cases, it means that we need to respond. In other cases, it means that people that we have relationships with in important places, they are to respond. There have been incidents at some of our private schools. Leadership at those different institutions have called out hate and said, not here, whether it's anti-Semitism or it's racism or whatever it might be. And further, I think it's about education and about proactivity. So we've learned the lesson of thinking that things like hate speech are going to go away, a very difficult lesson. We have a proactive plan of how we deal with these things as a system, and have assets that are marshaled in certain ways when, God forbid, they occur. But hate speech is very concerning. I'm not going to embolden any one of these organizations by calling them out by name, but go on the web and just Google some of these different hate groups and try to understand their mentality and what they're calling for. And it's a very scary time, and we have to be very vigilant and proactive.
Beth?
Yeah, I know there's a lot going on. I guess I would just ask Marc, what are trends? What are things we should be looking for going forward? Anything in this community we need to really watch for?
Well, I think one thing is hate, intolerance, and indifference. I think that that people that don't think that they're part and have a role in this, I think it's it will be at our peril. If good people don't talk up and do things and support different institutions that are doing good work, I think this is a time that calls for that type of action. And I think people thinking, somebody else will deal with that, or I'm too busy. I think, again, it's at our peril. I think that the economy continues to be very concerning. There are some people who don't have jobs or are underemployed. People, if you had money in the markets, maybe you're doing well, but people that don't have a stock portfolio and are relying on things like jobs, or in some cases are relying on unemployment insurance, and that hasn't been a deliverable. We have people that have been calling us that we've had to extend loans to through different entities because they haven't received their unemployment insurance. So these are just real things. We are at a very unusual, very troubling juncture in our cycle, in our lives. As a matter of fact, I think Beth, you definitely know. In January of this year, the Associated was to begin, which we did, our centennial celebration, a year long of different seminars and events and you name it. We had it, and it was going to be a real feel good about what this community has done over 100 years. In March, everything was suspended. The reason being, we were in the throes of writing the story instead of telling the story. So we put everything on hold. And so right now it's all in on making sure that our community is supported, healthy, whole, safe, and that we continue to keep people engaged. That's really our principal emphasis right now. So as for trends, we got a lot going against us. Natural disasters, hate speech, war, terror, you name it. And unfortunately, in 1920, the Associated, when it was born, had to deal with a lot of the similar stuff. A big terror attack became on the psyche of the American public with a terror attack down on Wall Street at that time. Spanish flu was starting to subside, but still the aftermath was pretty significant. So trends, we've got tons of them, and not a lot of them are good.
Scott, do you have anything else you want to ask Mark?
Just a little question. I mean, this could go on, and nobody really knows, but it looks like it could go on another 6 to 9 months at this level. Hopefully that's all it's going to go on. How are you all planning ahead for that period of time to be in this emergency mode?
Another really good question. What you need to know is, like on March 20th, for example, there was a group of people who were expert in service provision, in management and operations, in facilities, in financial modeling and planning. We were getting together 5 times a week for a minimum of an hour and a half every day, looking at these different types of scenarios and being planful about what goes on. Now, in terms of long-term planning, really a long-term plan is a couple months out. It's not 3 to 5 years. It's a couple months out. So we're having our planning function is engaged daily in monitoring, and we're making forecasts and plans that go out quarterly as opposed to yearly, because we just don't know. We just don't know about if a person who gave a very important gift at $500 is going to be able to repeat that, or that person is able to pay the pledge that they already made. So far, so good. People are pledging and they're paying, but we still have a lot of unknowns. So that's why, and of course, in March of this year, we had Corona. Then we had social and political unrest. Then we had fires, hurricanes, tornadoes. It was like, what is going to be next? So we're very attentive to what's going on and trying to be as planful as possible, but it's no more like plan for a year or plan for 3 to 5 or what. It's planning quarterly at the very most.
So at J Moore, and that's really helpful to know, we were planning to be one of your communication partners for the 100th anniversary. We're ready for 101. 101 sounds pretty good to us, Mark. That seems like a great event to have, is 101st anniversary. What do you think of that?
I think it's first of all, it's real, because we're not celebrating right now. So, but as I said to my children, again, I grew up in Miami. I'm in Baltimore because the professional opportunity here is the type of community that I sought. Baltimore is home. All 3 of my kids were born here. They're all Ravens fans, even though my wife is from Pittsburgh and she tried to convert them. It hasn't worked. So one of the things that is just incredible is that I believe that along the way, there's been such an important story to tell about how human beings and collectively as human beings under the banner of a community can make miracles happen. And whether that was nation building in Israel and the role that Baltimore played, or it was a movement of large swaths of people from places like Ethiopia and the former Soviet Union to places for a better life like in Israel or in the United States, there's such incredible stories to tell. And I think right now we're holding the pen, writing the next one.
Very good. This has been very, very helpful, Mark. And I appreciate it. We all appreciate the update. 3,000 to 5,000 people typically view between Facebook and YouTube and others view these shows. So it's really great that you've gotten the word out on how Associated is supporting the community during the pandemic. Beth, any last questions that you've got?
No, I'm going to add a few things, if that's okay, before yes, I'm sorry, Jonathan, you have questions?
Yep, real quickly for Mark. Mark, how can community members get a hold of the Associated if they really need emergency assistance, whether it's food, whether there are issues on the home front, whether on the job front? Who should they call? Who should they contact? Could you let our listeners know that?
Yes, the principal point of entry to make it really easy for people is Jewish Community Services. And if you go to their website or call their office, we have navigators who will help to point individuals in the right direction in order for them to access those services. So that really is the point of contact. So the number is 410-466-9200. A colleague just put it in the chat. Thank you very much for that. And that is really the point of access.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Scott, one thing I do want to say, in addition to wishing, first and foremost, everybody a healthy, happy, productive, safe new year that is hopefully with an effective vaccine. And I'm also praying that it's developed by a Jewish member of the world. And that
I'm pretty sure that's a guarantee, but there you go.
And I want to thank you and your colleagues at J Moore. This during a time of a pandemic when we have limited ways of getting together and really sharing ideas and being somewhat proximate, it's really terrific that you and your colleagues are doing this. And I want to thank also Beth for the role that she's playing. And by the way, in some of those virtual opportunities in educational in nature, today at 4 o'clock, there is, which Beth is moderating, we have the Insight Israel Forum, which is educational on issues of Israel and different viewpoints. Today we have Jonathan Tobin, who is the chief editor of the Jewish News Syndicate, and JJ Goldberg, who is the editor-at-large of the Forward magazine, or newspaper. So it could be very interesting. 4 o'clock today. All you have to do is click and participate. So, but thank you to you and to Jay Moore for everything that you're doing.
Mark, it's a real pleasure and an honor to work with you all on this, and to be part of a solution in the community is something we're thrilled to be part of.
Thank you.
Thank you. Beth, take it away.
I guess that just leaves me to say thank you also. Mark, thank you so much for being here today. To me, you are absolutely the role model for dedication and devotion to the Jewish community. I know how much you care. I know, I would say your tireless dedication, but I know it's hard not to be tired from the days that you spend. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here and for all you do. I also want to remind everyone, Mark mentioned it, the Associated has just kicked off our annual campaign. Clearly, now more than ever, we need you to continue to care about those who are struggling, to help us combat anti-Semitism, promote social justice, and build a strong Jewish Baltimore. So you can go to associated.org to learn more. And also on our website, you'll find that we do have some offerings beyond the virtual ones we spoke about today. The JCC has many programs that are in person. The Jewish Museum is open several days by appointment reservation. So most things you do need reservations for, but check into it and see what we do have going on in what people call real life. I would also say next Tuesday, we will be together again for a great show. Continue to visit associated.org and jmoreliving.com for more information, stories, resources, and you can sign up for the weekly newsletter. And from all of us at the Associated and Jay Moore, Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.